welcome back to Din and Daf. This is Elana Stein Hain, and I'm coming to you in a background full of plants because we're giving a special shir for Chag HaAviv, for Pesach. The topic of today's shir is Mechirat Chametz, selling Chametz. Many of you know that the concept of Halakhic circumventions is a concept that is dear to my heart because I think in some ways it actually helps us maintain the heart of Halakha, where we can find circumventions around difficult issues and still maintain a halachic framework. And today we're going to talk about one such circumvention, namely Mechirat Chametz. Before we get to the Makorot, before we get to the sources, I want to remind us that Mechirat Chametz actually, as a loophole or a legal circumvention, actually shows up as part of a whole matrix of rabbinic thought about legal circumventions. The rabbis actually have a term for it. The term is ha'arama, hey, ayin, resh, mem, hey, which you may in your mind think of the nachash, the snake in the Garden of Eden, being arum mikol chayat hasadeh, being more cunning than all animals, which is a negative. You may also think about Sefer Mishlei, the book of Proverbs, in which orma is prudence or common sense. And Chazal use that term ha'arama to talk about a lot of private loopholes for people who are in a pinch. And essentially, their question is not, are loopholes good or bad? The question is, when are they good? When are they bad? And that's something for us to be able to understand, that there are two broader points to understand in Chazal in order to appreciate where Mechirat Chametz comes from. The first point is that when Chazal talk about where are loopholes good, where are loopholes bad, generally speaking, the topic of integrity is central. So they'll have either the integrity of the goal, meaning if the goal that you are doing this loophole for is a goal that is recognized or should be recognized as a halachic value, for example, HaTorah chasa al mamonam shel Yisrael, the Torah cares and takes into account to protect the money of Jewish people. They shouldn't go bankrupt while trying to keep halakha. For example, not wanting you to violate an Aveira. For example, being able to have Simchat Yom Tov. These are all examples of values or goals that are within the purview of halakha itself. And Chazal say that's a good reason to use a loophole. There's another type of integrity that they care about, which is the integrity of the process. Sometimes, even if the goal is good, you have to make sure that the process that you're going through is legitimate. So, for example, sometimes you'll have a conversation within Chazal as to whether certain kinds of isurim, certain kinds of prohibitions can even be circumvented at all. For instance, is there a difference between prohibitions that are explicitly mentioned in the Torah versus prohibitions that are not, or prohibitions that we might call derabanan, as opposed to prohibitions that are deoraita? Maybe process-wise, even if you have a good goal, a goal that halakha recognizes, maybe process-wise, if you're trying to circumvent a rabbinic law, that's okay. But if you're trying to circumvent a biblical law, that may be a problem for the system. So those are two parts of the conversation in Chazal in general about harama. The second piece that I want to offer here as background is to recognize that when you talk about legal circumventions, you're actually not talking about something that's a bug within rabbinic thought. It is a feature of rabbinic thought, because rabbinic thought, in contrast to Greek thought, Roman thought, Christian thought, and anachronistically Western thought as it develops based on those first three, Greek, Roman, and Christian, Chazal don't see the letter of the law or the form of the law, the way you do things. They don't see that as something that is non-essential to halakha itself. They don't just see what you are accomplishing as the only thing that matters. They also see how you do it as something that matters. So, for example, think to yourself, if there was a situation where you were allowed to violate a derabanan on Shabbos in order to help someone, but you're not allowed to violate a deoraita, you might find yourself doing something that is a Torah prohibition, but doing it with a shinui, doing it with some sort of change in the process of how you do it in order to make it, quote unquote, only a rabbinic violation. Now, that is, if you think that the process or the letter or the form of how you do things doesn't matter, then the idea of a shinoi shouldn't make any sense. The idea of doing something with a meaningful change shouldn't make any sense. But that is not how Chazal think. They actually think that the letter of the law, the form of the law, the way that you do things is part of halakha itself. It's not some non-essential husk of something that is deeper. There is no true distinction between spirit of the law and letter of the law, the way there is in Christianity. That's something to really think about. It's a different jurisprudential model. So those are my two background pieces. With those in mind, I want to head into the sources about Mechirat Chametz. Okay. So first things first, I want us to just look at what's the reason why we're selling our chametz. And the reason why we're selling our chametz is because we have an isser in the Torah. We have a biblical prohibition of bal yira'eh bal yimatzeh, not to be able to have chametz on your own property during Pesach or in your own property, so to speak, meaning in your ownership, under your ownership on Pesach. And here are the psukim. Shmot Yud Bet Yud Tet Shivat Yamim So'or Lo Yimatzeh B'Vatechem. Right, for 7 days, 11 shouldn't be found in your house. Ki Cholochel Machmetzet V'Nechrata Nefesh Ahi Me'adat Yisrael Bager Uvazrach Haaretz. Right, for anybody who eats chametz is going to get karet. Okay, now that does seem to connect the idea that you shouldn't have it in your house to the idea that you shouldn't eat it. But suffice to say, there is actually an isser that is independent, not to even have it in your possession. Shmot Yud Gimel adds matzot yachel et shivat hayamim. You should be eating matzah, or matzah should be eaten for 7 days. V'lo yira'eh lecha chametz, v'lo yira'eh lecha seor b'chol gvulecha. Right, and chametz and seor should not be seen in all of your boundaries. Now, I want to just make it very clear: the lecha becomes very important, right? Because what happens if it's somebody else's chametz that's in your on your property, right? We'll get to that when we get to that. But that's really the isser that we are trying to get, that we're trying to circumvent, essentially, the ownership of chametz. Why would you want to circumvent such an issue? Well, we're going to get there. Why not just do the mitzvah of tashbitu, the mitzvah of destroying your chametz? What is this business of, doing a circumvention to sell? We're going to see how that develops. Another thing we have to know is that Chazal have a knas, they have a penalty against someone who keeps their chametz over Pesach, which means that it cannot be eaten after Pesach. So even if somebody, b'di'eved, somebody kept their chametz, not only have they violated bal yira'eh and bal yimatzeh, they also cannot eat it. They also have an isser derabanan to eat it after Pesach. Okay, so let's just see in early sources, before we get to an idea, it seems, of selling your chametz as a workaround, as a type of ha'arama, or the place where we start to see it. We start to see it in Tanaitic literature. Okay, in the Mishnah, does not seem to be a ha'arama. It simply says, the Mishnah at the beginning of the second parak of Pesachim, kol sha'ah shemutar le'achol, so long as somebody can eat chametz on Erev Pesach, which, by the way, the Gemara interprets as so long as a Kohen can eat truma on Erev Pesach, which Rabbi Gamliel, I think, thinks it's an hour later, so it would be till the 5th hour as opposed to the 4th hour. But that's not for now. What hour are we really talking about? But so long as you're allowed to eat chametz, or it seems like maybe the Kohen is allowed to eat chametz truma on Erev Pesach, ma'achila behema l'chayav la'ofot, you can feed it to animals. U'mocher l'nochuri, you can sell it to a non-Jew. U'mutar b'hanato, and you can get hana from it. You can get benefit from it, right? Because not only is chametz aser ba'achila, it is also aser b'hana, right? Not only are you not allowed to eat it, you are not allowed to get benefit from it. So the Gemara says, what do you mean? Of course you can sell it to a non-Jew so long as you can eat it, or maybe so long as the Kohen can eat their truma on Erev Yontif, on Erev Pesach, pshita, obviously. Well, actually, la'afuke, what this is coming to teach you is that we don't hold the following. Mehai Tana, from the following Tana, de Tanya, Beit Shammai omrim, lo yimkor adam chemto lenachri, ela im kein yodea bo sheichle, kodem haPesach, right? Beit Shammai actually had the position, you shouldn't sell your chametz to a non-Jew unless you know that the chametz is going to be finished, eaten before Pesach. Beit Hillel omrim kol sha'ashem mutar lechol mutar limkor. Beit Hillel says what the Mishnah says, right? So you could have even thought about a more machmir version that you can't even sell it to a non-Jew to use for themselves, if it won't be finished before Pesach, but that's not what the Mishnah rules. But in the Tosefta, we have a situation where you actually do see somebody who's in a bind, and in order to get out of that bind, they sell their chametz to a non-Jew or give it as a gift. So here we go, Tosefta Pesachim, Perek Bet. Now the Tosefta, just to remind everybody, is a companion piece to the Mishnah. It has some materials that are earlier than the Mishnah, but it seems to have been anthologized, some 20, 25 years after the Mishnah. And the reason why I say that is because it includes a name that is post-Mishnaic. Okay. Yisrael v'nochri shahayu ba'in b'sfina v'chametz biyad Yisrael. So you have a Jew and a Gentile who are on a boat, right? Imagine they're in waters, they're not coming home, right? And the Jew owns chametz. And we're getting to Pesach. So the Jew can sell it to the non-Jew or can give it as a gift, and can buy it back or get it back as a gift after Pesach. So long as the Jew gives, if they're giving it as a gift, the Jew gives it as a full gift, meaning there's no t'naim, there's no conditions. There's no, I'm giving you this on condition that you give it back to me. It has to be a matana gmura. So here we see a real example of a Jew getting out of a bind of owning chametz on Pesach by selling their food to a non-Jew and then buying it back or giving it to a non-Jew. And then the Tosefta goes even further. Rashai Yisrael shiomar lenochri, a Jew can say to a non-Jew, it seems like you're in the market for some chametz, right? You're in the market and you want to spend 100 zuz, which is a maneh. Kach b'matayim, buy from me, I don't know, either 200's worth or maybe buy at a higher price, meaning because it doesn't matter, Shema et starich v'avo v'kach mimcha achar Pesach, because maybe I'll have to buy it back from you after Pesach. Wink, wink. Now, this is a little strange. Some people actually have the opposite girsa, which is, oh, you were going to buy it for 200 from that person, buy it from me for 100, because I probably can, and I'll probably also have to buy some back from you after Pesach. It's a little confusing, but I would say maybe what's going on here is he's basically saying, I know you don't need so much of this product, but I'll probably buy half of it back from you after Pesach anyway, right? Like you only need half of this, so take it. So this is a really interesting example. It seems like the forerunner for what we do. Now, is this saying that a person could do this every year? Certainly the Sfina, the boat example, seemed to be an example where it happened like once in a lifetime. Is this sort of, you can always do this, is this allowed? Okay, so that's a second source that seems to be a little bit more ha'arama-like. Then we have a source in the Yerushalmi, which is interesting, which actually brings in ha'arama, even the term, very explicitly. When a person decides, it's not that they're selling their chametz to somebody else, it's not that they're destroying their chametz, it's that they are being mafkir or mafkira. They are declaring their chametz ownerless on the 13th of Nisan, right? So here we go. If a person made their chametz hefker on the 13th of Nisan, they declared it ownerless, la'achar Pesach, after Pesach, Mahu, what's the halacha? Is it considered to be chametz shavar lava Pesach? Is it considered to be chametz that was owned by the person over Pesach? Now, we're assuming what happened was a person declares it ownerless. Nobody comes and picks it up, which doesn't shock me, right? You have like a day till Pesach. I'm not sure where this person even declared the hefkerut. I don't know if there's a non-Jew who would pick it up, like if people would eat it. Unclear. So Rabbi Yochanan Amar Asur. Rabbi Yochanan says you can't eat this after Pesach. Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish Amar Mutar, and Rish Lakish says you can. Okay, and one of the explanations in the Gemara is Rabbi Yochanan chashash laharama. Rabbi Yochanan said you can't eat it after Pesach because he was worried about harama. He was worried about subterfuge. Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish lo chashash laharama, and Rish Lakish was not worried about subterfuge. Now, what kind of subterfuge could go on here? Now, one of the Mefarshim of the Yerushalmi says the subterfuge would be that you say that you declared hefker, but you never actually did. I think that's just lying. I'm not sure that is the way that the Yerushalmi uses the term harama in general. But the other, I also wonder if what we're really talking about here is a person who is actually doing this because I'm going to do it the day before Erev Pesach. Nobody's going to take it, and I'm going to be able to get it right back. And essentially, what they're doing is they're avoiding having to do tashbitu. They're avoiding having to get rid of their chametz. They're hoping that nobody takes it, and maybe that's actually the harama. So that might be a little bit closer to our world of mechirat chametz. Except, I want to just point out when you say that it's hefker, if nobody's taken it yet, right? That's very different than if I've done mechirat chametz and I've actually sold it to somebody and it's now technically legally in somebody else's possession, right? I think the fact that it's no person's land here, it's a little like we're worried. Did you actually did you mean to make it hefker? Did you really mean it? Right? Like what's actually going on here? So those are our three earlier examples. Then where we're going to go ultimately as halakha continues to develop through the Middle Ages and into the pre-modern and modern period. So first of all, in terms of the conversations about the possibility of mechirat chametz, I want to point out that the two most significant sources, because they say the most, are the Ritva and the Bach. Okay, so the Ritva is Rav Yom Tov ibn Avraham in Seville in the 13th century in Spain, and the Bach is Rav Yosef, 16th century to 17th century Central Europe. And the Ritva basically says, oh, I have a girsa of the Tosefta. I have a version of the Tosefta where it says that a Jewish person can say to a non-Jewish person, here, I know you only need $100 worth of, 100 zuz worth of chametz, but why don't you buy 200 for me? Because I'll probably have to buy it back from you after Pesach anyway, right? He has a few words added on to the Tosefta. Take a look. It says, here's what's in the Tosefta. You can say to a non-Jew, a Jew can say to a non-Jew, like we said, right? You were going to buy 100, either 100's worth, or you were going to buy 100, spend 100, spend 200. I'm willing to pay you back. I may have to buy back from you after Pesach anyway. And here are the three words he adds: Uvilvad shelo ya'arim. So long as there's no subterfuge. What do we mean by that? Aval im ha'arim, if the person is using subterfuge, v'hu ragil lasot kein b'chol shanim, and they do this every year, limkor legoy kodem Pesach, to sell to a non-Jew before Pesach, v'litol achar Pesach, and to take it back after Pesach, kansinamle, we give them a knas, we penalize them, right? V'hu asur lo u'lechol Yisrael lachar Pesach. That chametz is prohibited to the person and to any Jew after Pesach. She'asa'uhu ki'iluhu chametz shel Yisrael hamufkad b'reshut goy. Because halachically we consider it as though it is the chametz that belongs to a Jew that is simply a pikadon, simply something that the non-Jew is watching for them. Okay. Now, with that in mind, holy cow, no mechirat chametz. By the way, the Vilna Gaon actually is cited as having this position. We're going to see it later. Now, the Bach tells us a very different story. The Bach tells us a different story at a different time in a different place. He says, over Medina zo, in this country, sherov masat umatan ubeyin saraf, that most of the business we do is selling liquor. Chametz, not all obviously, but we're talking about like malt, beer kind of things. Ve'efshar lahem lemochram legoy michutz labayit, and you can't even sell this to a non-Jew outside of the house, meaning you can't even move all of the chametz that you have out of your house if you want to sell it to a non-Jew so that it's not on your property. Bifrat lemachzikim be'orenda, especially people who are leasing. I'm not sure if it's the lease of the I'm not sure if it's the lease of the like the millstone. I'm not sure if it's the lease of the land. I think it might be the lease of the millstone, where it's sort of like a sharecropping type of thing, where the Jews would take some of what they made and the government would get the rest. seems like they wouldn't be able to move things in that situation either. In that case, yesh lahatir be'inyan zeh sheyimkor legoy kol hachametz shebacheder. He says, in such a situation, we are going to allow you to sell all of the chametz that's in that room. I guess that's your sort of storage room for the liquor making. The gam hacheder atzmo yimkor lagoy, and you should also sell the room itself to the non-Jew. This way, it's not technically on your property, right? So we have the Bach not only saying you can sell your chametz, by the way, year after year, not only saying you can sell your chametz, but you even don't have to move it out of your house because you can't in this situation. What we are talking about here is so clearly the integrity of the value of HaTorah Chasa al Mamonam Shel Yisrael. You can't go bankrupt in keeping Torah and keeping Halakha. The Bach continues and says, by the way, generally speaking, if we were doing business with a non-Jew, we would and selling them land, there would have to be a shtar, there would have to be a contract, a written contract. He's wary of that because he's worried that the person, the non-Jew, might take the contract and say, see, I'm going to keep the land. So he says, make a condition that even though you're not writing a contract, the kesef, the money exchange, is as though it is a contract. Okay. So the Bach is really our most permissive source. And I just want us to think about what the permission was about. The permission was about Hefsid Meruba. The permission was about big financial loss, right? Now, I'm speaking to you honestly as somebody who doesn't have enough chametz in their house at a given time. I'm not a Costco shopper. I don't live in a house. I live in an apartment. So what we do is we spend the month before Pesach finishing up our chametz, eating it, giving things away. I don't have a liquor cabinet worth a lot of money, so it's a little bit different. I don't have hefsed meruba, so I don't do it, right? I keep kitniot items in my uh, 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 in my pantry over Pesach. I get rid of all the chametz items, and that's it. Shalom al Yisrael, right? We're good. But for people who live in a house, or for people who have expensive liquor, for people who can't afford to do such a thing, this is why this is here. This is why this is here. Okay. Now, I want to say it's still quoted in the name I mentioned, in the name of the Vilna Gaon, in Ma'aser Rav, which is a collection of legal customs of the Vilna Gaon, but put together by his students, that he held shalolim kor shum davar chametz ki mechira olamit. You can only sell chametz if you're selling it forever, meaning if it is a forever sale, right? So I think it's just interesting to see the way that these things develop. Sometimes in an earlier time, it's not considered hefsed meruba, it's not considered a major loss, and at some other time, it is considered a major loss, right? On a boat, when you're stuck and you're stuck between a rock and a hard place, we don't want you to have to, throw things overboard. And we also don't want you to violate owning chametz. That's uh like that's an example also, right? So it's just important to understand the contours of how this developed. Now, I want to mention one more aspect, because when I introduced this issue, I said this is within the matrix of general what's the word I'm looking for? General haramot, general loopholes that we find within Chazal, even though this one seems to have developed a lot more over time. And that within that matrix, they're looking for integrity of goals. And here, certainly, Hefsid Meruba, a major monetary loss, is certainly a significant goal that Halakha cares about. And they also talked about integrity of process. Now, within that integrity of process, I mentioned that there are those who discuss the question of what level of prohibition is circumventable. That is it possible that explicit min haTorah prohibitions are not circumventable? Explicit biblical prohibitions are not circumventable. And it's interesting. I want to show you two different approaches for those who actually do hold this way, who actually do hold that you can't override, you can't circumvent, rather, I should say, a biblical prohibition, they have a little bit of a problem because Bal Yireh and Bal Yimatzeh, the Isser of owning Chametz on Pesach, it's a biblical prohibition, right? So they need to figure out a way that it's either only a rabbinic prohibition or it only applies to Mechir Chametz can only be used for things that are rabbinically prohibited, right? So the first approach that actually, no, owning Chametz on Pesach can itself be a rabbinic prohibition only, quote unquote, relies on the fact that in the Gemara says that midoraita bevitel ba'alma sagilei, that min haTorah biblically, it's enough to be mivatel your chametz, right? Which is what we do when we do our b'dika chametz, right? We do two kinds of bittul. We do two kinds of nullification. We do nullification where we say it should be hefker, like we don't own it, and we also do nullification that it should be like afar haaretz. We don't even look at it as food, right? That biblically that may be enough. And the Balei HaTosfot say, "Va'omeri to midoraita bebitul ba'alma sagi." So Rabbeinu Yitzchak the Tosafos says, what does this mean? Mitam demeachar shebitlo have a hefker v'yatzam shuto umutar. Why? Because when you're mevatel your chametz, you're actually what you're doing is you're making it hefker. Now, I just want to remind us about that Yerushalmi that we saw before about Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish arguing about whether you can make your chametz hefker and that's good enough, right? And now it's out of your reshut, it's out of your possession, and now it is allowed. Now, I want to just point out, he doesn't mean even rabbinically. He means only biblically. But what that could mean is perhaps as long as you do bittul chametz, the rest of the isser is quote unquote only derabanan, and an isser derabanan you can get around with a circumvention like selling your chametz, right? That was the reading of Rabbi Alexander Shore. That's the way he understood it, and I think it's very clever, very thoughtful, and very clever. Clearly, the Vilna Gaon didn't agree, but that's right, anachronistic. But clearly, the Vilna Gaon didn't agree. And then there's a second way that people do this. It's they say, wait a minute. Maybe there is a difference between owning what we call chametz gamor or owning a mixture of chametz, tarovet chametz. Because tarovet chametz may be, at least according to one view in Tosfot, may be only rabbinically prohibited to own on Pesach. And therefore, yeah, you can't sell your cake and your cookies and your bread, but you can sell things that have a mixture, have some chametz in them. And those are the things you can sell because you're only allowed to go around the derabanan. So let's see the example. So it all comes from a Mishnah in Pesachim in Perek Gimel. Elu ovrin bepesach. These are the things that are ovrin. We're going to try to figure out what that word means because that's the source of the machloket here. These are the things that are ovrin on Pesach. Kuta chabavli, a mixture of bread and milk. Shechar hamadi, Median beer, which seems like it was made with wheat or barley. Chometz ha'adomi, Edomite vinegar, right? Barley wine fermentation. Zaitim hamitzri, Egyptian zaitum, not zaitim, zaitum, which was barley, salt, saffron. Okay, these are all things that seem to be mixtures of chametz and non-chametz. So Tosfot say ve'elu ovrin b'Pesach. These are the things that are ovrin on Pesach. Pirush HaKontros, what Rashi says is la'avor alein b'bayira b'yimatzeh, meaning these are the things that you are over, you violate b'yira and b'yimatzeh, owning chametz, if you own them. V'gam Riva, and the Riva medakdek, he actually says milashon ovrim, the language of ovrim, he says demashma ovrin min ha'olam, they have to leave this world, meaning you have a responsibility of tashbitu, you have to destroy them. But Rabbeinu Tam does not agree. Veneer la Rabbeinu Tam, and I'm just skipping to the bold because I want to say one more thing after this. Veneer la Rabbeinu Tam de elu ovrin, he says, Rabbeinu Tam thinks that elu ovrin, these following things are ovrin, perush, it means ha'ochlin ve'ovrin hainu me'al hashulchan. Excuse me, sorry. I just got distracted by a phone call. What does Elu Avrin mean? Perish ha'ochlin, the food itself has to be over in, not like the Rashi that we're over on it, that we violate something, but the food has to leave, meaning leave what? Overin hainu ala shulchan. They have to leave the table. Delav b'nei mechal minhu. They are not supposed to be eaten on Pesach. Aval bayira leka, but they're not biblically a violation of bayira and balimatzeh. Okay, so here we have, let's make it very clear, nobody is telling anybody that they're allowed to own mixtures of chametz on Pesach, but it may not be a biblical prohibition, it may be a rabbinic prohibition, and that is what would allow somebody to sell it. Okay, so we have three basic positions. One position is that selling chametz each year is a no-go. That's the Vilna Gaon. That's the Ritva. One position is selling chametz is legitimate year after year, either because you are allowed to do ha'arama on min haTorah violations, or because this is quote unquote only a midrabanan violation, because we're going to be mevatel our chametz anyway, and biblically that takes care of it because it's not in your reshut, not in your ownership. And third, you can only sell chametz mixtures because those are rabbinically prohibited to own in Pesach rather than biblically. I will also add that underlying all of this seems to be that if you do not have a hefsed meruba, if you do not have a real loss here, there is no reason to be selling chametz. And real loss is going to be determined by different people's finances. Let's be very, very clear. Somebody's $100 loss is somebody else's $1,000 loss. Like, that's important to recognize. It's highly, highly subjective. One more thing that I want to say, and I saw this in Rabbi Chaim Jachter's article online, that a few of the reasons why this moved from what seems to be a pretty decentralized situation where different people would just sell their chametz to non-Jews, to having an emissary, a rabbinic emissary for you, a few different reasons that he suggested. One is the idea that people were actually not selling the area, not selling the piece of land where the object was, right? Which is kind of interesting if you think that that is needed. Another is people were just forgetting to mention where their food was in their house so the Gentile could get to it. And another is simply the idea of formalizing and making sure that the kinyan is actually done in a way that has real procedural integrity from a halakhic standpoint. So what I hope this does for people who sell their chametz or don't have to sell their chametz, I just hope that it actually allows people to appreciate what the idea here is, that we actually don't want people going bankrupt from halakha, but we do want people understanding that there is a value to not owning chametz on Pesach, and that value should be upheld in not just a technical way, but even in a manner of, more philosophical consideration, that is something that still matters even if you sell your chametz. I will say that if anybody is interested in going down this rabbit hole of legal loopholes, the book that I wrote, I want to just give you my 30% off coupon. It's called Circumventing the Law. Go to University of Pennsylvania Press website. You can just Google it. And there's a discount code, all caps, PENN hyphen, all caps, ESHAIN, the number 30 at checkout. Wishing everybody a Chag Kasher this summer.